Chapter 19, Tippy. Well, whatever you're not supposed to tell me is exactly what I want to hear, so let's hear it, Mr. Hepburn said firmly. Peter stared down at his bowl. Who was up there? Somebody we know? His father asked. A man, Peter said. Who? I don't know. A man in a truck. When did you see him? A couple of days ago. Caroline closed her eyes. They were all going to prison. She was sure of it. They had all been up to a place they shouldn't have been. She imagined herself in jail wearing a black and white striped suit, or maybe it was orange. What was the man doing? Mr. Hepburn asked. Chasing. The two mothers were in the doorway now, and Mr. Hepburn remained standing, hands on his hips, facing the rows of kids. Who was the man chasing Peter? Asked his mother. I can't tell, I promised. If you don't tell him, Peter, the wrong person may be blamed for that explosion. If you want to help the police do their work, you'd better tell me, said his father. In fact, if you want to eat at the table for the next 2 weeks, you'd better tell me now. Who was he chasing? Peter looked at Jake, then back down at his peach cobbler. Us, he said. Well, not all of us exactly. He was chasing Eddie and Jake. Why? Because they climbed through the fence. There were 2 or 3 seconds of silence, and then came another explosion, this time right there in the room, as Mr. Hepburn's voice filled every centimeter of the space. Don't you two know better than to do that? He bellowed. You're the oldest of the bunch, and you go set an example like that? How many times have I told you boys never, ever to go near that mine? Are you numbskulls? And now Mrs. Malloy's voice was loud. Eddie, what were you doing up there? How could you do something so dangerous? We just wanted to see what was in the tunnel. We weren't going to go down a shaft or anything. It was a dare, Jake explained. I dared Eddie to do it, and she dared me. Well, that's the dumbest reason I could think of, Mr. Hepburn continued yelling. Dumb, dumb, dumb. I thought you two were smarter than that. I'm sorry, mumbled Jake. So who was this man? Asked his father. I don't know. All of a sudden, there he was going all crazy, and we tore out of there. He didn't have a uniform on or anything. I don't think it was a guard. We just went tearing down the hill as fast as we could with him yelling at us. Never to come back, said Jake. Do you realize what a dangerous thing you kids have done? Boomed Mr. Hepburn. If he was the one who set off that charge, do you realize he might have been going to set the explosives off the very day you were up there? You kids sit right there and don't move while I call the sheriff. I'm going to let him question you. The adults were talking in the kitchen. The 7 kids sat in the living room. Peter looked most miserable of all. Man, oh man, are we in for it, said Josh. I've never seen Dad so mad. I have, said Peter. Remember the time Jake called the termite inspector to go to the house next door and, hush, said Jake. The more Caroline thought about it, the more relieved she was that her own father wasn't there. With both of the dads yelling, it would have been like thunder in the house. There was the sound of a car pulling into the driveway, the footsteps and voices on the porch. Mrs. Hatford answered the door, and both the sheriff and the chief of police walked in. Mr. Hatford pointed out Jake and Eddie. The sheriff sat down. Caroline listened while Jake had to explain all over again how he and Eddie had sort of dared each other to go into the coal mine, how they'd intended to go down a shaft, hadn't intended to go down a shaft. They had just wanted to peek, to say that they had gone in, and the way he told it, it sounded as though he and Eddie were longtime friends. Your dad says a man at the mine chased you, the police chief said. Where did he come from? We don't know, said Jake. He seemed to just pop up out of nowhere. Was he in the tunnel or outside it? Outside, said Caroline. I think he was in the bushes. As soon as we heard him shouting, we ran, said Eddie. We'd only just stepped inside the entrance when we heard him. How tall was he? Tall as I am? Shorter, maybe, said Jake. Taller, said Wally. I saw him chasing you, and he looked like a giant to me. He was not, said Beth. The sheriff rolled his eyes. Okay, what did he look like? Did he have a beard? A mustache? Yes, said Caroline. A beard, I think. He didn't have a beard, said Josh. I'd remember if he had a beard. He had a mustache, but he didn't have a beard, said Beth. What color was his hair? Asked the chief. Gray, said Josh. Yellow, said Jake. A yellowish color. Brown, said Caroline. We don't even know what color his hair was. He was wearing a cap, said Wally. Can't you kids agree on anything? Asked the police chief. He was driving a truck, said Peter. We all saw that. An old rusty truck. Yes, said Caroline. An old rusty brown truck. Did anyone get the license number? Asked the sheriff. The kids hung their heads. Was it a West Virginia license plate at least? Can you tell us that? I think so, said Josh, but you're not sure. Did anyone actually see the license plate? Nobody had. And that was the last you saw of him in his truck? Asked the police chief. No, he was outside our house on the road, said Caroline. Here? Cried Mrs. Hatford. Did you get a good look at him? Asked the sheriff. Josh shook his head. We were underwater, he said. I mean, when we saw him stop his truck, we ducked down under the water. We didn't want him to know who we were, said Caroline. Did he say anything to you? No, she said. Just looked at us, then drove away. It was creepy. The sheriff was writing things down on a notepad, and for a while, Caroline figured he had asked every question there was to ask. Surely by now, he knew that she and her sisters and the Hatford boys had nothing to do with that explosion. The sheriff closed his notebook. He put his pen back in the pocket, and then, just when Caroline thought the worst was over, he leaned forward, looked from one kid to the next until his eyes had traveled down the whole row, and said, Who's Tippy? Chapter 20. Email to Georgia. Dear Bill and Danny and Steve and Tony and Doug. I don't know if your computer is hooked up. For all I know, you guys could already be on your way back here. But man, oh man, have you ever missed some excitement? First, you won't believe this, but the Malloys have been staying here for the past few days because there's a heat wave in Ohio and their electricity is off. They'd already left your house when they found out and all their furniture was gone. So Mom invited them to stay with us till the power came back on. They've been sleeping in Jake and Josh's bedroom, all four of them. Talk about weird. And they threw our underwear in the closet. You know what would be even worse? If the heat wave hadn't broken here in West Virginia, our power went out and we had to go to Ohio and stay in their house for a while. That would be so awful, I don't even want to think about it. Then a storm came up here and the heat wave broke and we were without power for a while. Then we had a ladybug invasion and Caroline freaked out. Dad's been paying Peter a nickel for every dozen he collects and he's already got a jar full. That's just for starters. Then Jake and Eddie dared each other to go to the old coal mine. They've really been bugging each other. It's like having a cat and a dog under the same roof, and we've all been getting a little sick of them. Anyway, they did go, and a man came charging out of nowhere, yelling at them to get out. 2 days ago, there was a big explosion at the entrance to the mine. Peter, of course, told Dad we had been there, and Dad called the sheriff and the chief of police. They came over and asked us a lot of questions. And you know who did it? Who set off the dynamite? The guy who was yelling at us at the mine. And you know who he was? Some old man whose dog Tippy fell in that mine shaft and died down there. And the guy didn't discover where he was till too late. He told the police he'd been looking for the dog for a long time and finally found where he had fallen in. The guy was so mad that the county hadn't closed up that mine and so worried, I guess, that some kid might fall in there someday, especially when he saw Jake and Eddie in there, that he figured he better do something about it himself. So he bought some dynamite and blew up the entrance. Then he took a sharp rock and scratched something on the rocky wall. This is for you, Tippy. That was how the police found him. That and our description of his truck. I don't know what will happen to him. The newspaper says he did the county a service. The old coal mine should have been sealed up decades ago, and this guy did it for us. But the police say you can't go around setting off explosives no matter how good your reason might be. Dad thinks the guy will probably have a fine to pay, but that's all. And the newspaper might even pay it for him for doing a public service. But you guys should have been here. It was a blast in more ways than one. Right in the middle of police chief's questioning, a ladybug landed on Caroline's shoulder. They're still coming into the house from somewhere, and she jumped up and down and screamed. Now even the chief of police knows she's nuts. The girls will probably be going back to Ohio tomorrow. That's when their power is supposed to come back on, according to their dad. If you don't get here soon, there won't be any time left before school starts again. If you get this email, write back. Wally and Jake and Josh and Peter. Chapter 21. Email from Georgia. Dear Wally and Jake and Josh and Peter. Hey man, you guys really do get the excitement, don't you? You know what I wish? I wish we had stayed in Buckman while the girls were there. I mean, I wish they'd been living someplace else and we could have been in on all the jokes and stuff. All the summer sports are over down here and we'll be leaving for Buckman tomorrow. Dad plans to drive straight through in one day, so we have to get up at 5 in the morning. This is the last time we can use the computer before it's packed. I sure hope our house is still the way we left it. I hope the girls haven't put ballerina wallpaper in our bedrooms. I hope the Bugman is just the way we remember and that the swinging bridge hasn't been washed away in a storm or anything. What was it you always called those girls? The Whomper, the Weirdo, and the Crazy? Eddie the Whomper because she could hit a baseball so far. Beth the Weirdo because she read all those gross books about aliens and stuff. And Caroline the Crazy because you never knew what she'd do next. Tell the Whomper, the Weirdo, and the Crazy goodbye for us. Tell them we'd better not find any weird stuff in our rooms. Tell them this time when they go back to Ohio, stay there. And if they can't come there, then at least come back when we're all around to help make their lives miserable. Bill and Tony and Danny and Steve and Doug. Chapter 22. Goodbye, goodbye. The call came at 7:30 the following night. The electricity was on again in Ohio. Hooray! Shouted Eddie and Beth and Caroline together, and Mrs. Malloy's face looked relaxed with relief and pleasure. We're going to leave first thing in the morning, she told the Hatfords. You have all been so wonderful to put up with us for 5 days. It's been wonderful for me to come home and find dinner all prepared and the house straightened up, said Mrs. Hatford. And it gave us a chance to get to know each other a little better, Jean. Are we really, truly leaving, Mom? Asked Caroline. Right after breakfast, her mother answered. I want you girls to pack up all your things tonight and set your bags out in the hall ready to go. Then all you'll need to do in the morning is put your pajamas and toothbrushes in your bags and we're off. The girls did the dishes and cleared the table that evening. As soon as they were done, while the boys were watching a preseason football game on TV, Eddie whispered to her sisters, We've got to pay a visit to the Benson place before we go. How can we, Beth asked? The house is all cleaned and locked up, Eddie. Mom's already left the key with Mrs. Hatford. We don't need a key. Just follow me. Were they going to get in trouble again just before they left? Caroline wondered. Hadn't their trip to the old coal mine been enough trouble? If we do something bad, Eddie, God will probably turn off the electricity in Ohio again and we'll have to stay here forever. God wouldn't punish the whole state of Ohio just because of us. Get a flashlight and let's go. Out the back door they went, being careful not to let the screen slam. They went down the steps around the side of the house, across the swinging bridge. I'm going to be sorry to leave all this, said Caroline. And she was surprised to hear Eddie say, me too. Ohio's going to seem so boring without the boys. There are boys in Ohio too, said Beth, but not as nice as Josh Hatford. So what are we doing going back to the old Benson place? Just a little something to make sure they don't forget us. Up the hill they went until they could see the house and the old barn that was used for a garage. Into the garage. Up the ladder, said Eddie. They had a lot of good memories of the loft in the old Benson barn. Who could forget the abaguchi they trapped in the barn with Wally up in the loft, or the way the girls had spied on the boys from the loft window and vice versa. What do we do now? Asked Beth. In answer, Eddie pulled out her Swiss Army knife and tried it out on one of the wooden rafters. It made a deep, clean cut. I just want to make sure they remember our names. Hold the flashlight, Beth. Be sure to include my middle name, she said. The Malloys were here, Eddie carved, making slow, deep cuts in the wood. Eddie, Beth, and Caroline Lenore. Then she sat back on her heels to admire her work. The next time the Hatfords and the Bensons crawl up here for one of their club meetings, they'll have us to remember, said Beth. As though they could ever forget us, said Caroline, taking the knife and carving an exclamation point after her name. Eddie slipped the knife into her pocket and the girls crawled back across the floor and down the ladder. Hey, she yelled, someone's locked us in. What? The door wouldn't move. Caroline pushed with all her strength, but there wasn't any lock on that door, said Eddie. How could we be locked in? We'll be here forever. No one knows we're over here and the Bensons aren't back. Can it, Caroline? Save your tears for Broadway. And then she whispered, I'll bet the Hatfords are right outside holding the door closed. She and Beth and Caroline all put their shoulders against the door and pushed. It gave a little, but bounced. There was a muffled laughter from the other side. Eddie leaned over and whispered something into Caroline's ear, and immediately Caroline began to smile. While Eddie and Beth kept pushing against the door, Caroline climbed back up the ladder and crawled over the loft window, dragging a box of old hubcaps with her. She peered out the window into the gathering dark, and sure enough, there were Jake and Josh and Wally all laughing, pushing hard against the garage door. Caroline lifted the box of hubcaps to the edge of the window. She held out one. "Look out below," she yelled. Wally looked up. "Hey, she means it." The three boys scattered just before a rain of hubcaps tumbled down, rolling and clunking all over the ground. Eddie and Beth burst through the door, and they all ended up laughing as they ran after the rolling hubcaps and got them back in the box and up to the loft again. As they walked together back down the hill to the swinging bridge, the moon full in the sky, a light breeze blowing, Caroline said to herself, "Always remember this moment because it will never come again." Caroline was full of last moments because they always seemed so dramatic, something she could remember when she went on stage. The girls packed up as the mother had said to and set their bags outside the bedroom door. The next morning, Mrs. Moy woke them up early so that they could have breakfast with the Hatfords. The boys were sitting sleepy-eyed over their cereal at the table, and Mr. Hatford had a postal uniform ready to leave. "I'm going to miss finding you here when I get home from work each day," Mrs. Hatford told them. It was nice having girls around the house for a change. She ignored the groans from the boys. "But you won't miss having 4 extra people lined up for the bathroom and clothes all over the place," Mrs. Molloy told her. "Now you can have your house back the way it was, and I can't tell you how grateful I am that you let us stay." Mr. Hatford carried their bags and suitcases out to the car before he said goodbye. Then Mr. Hatford got in his own car and drove off. The girls stood facing the boys on the driveway, all of them feeling awkward and wishing the moment was over. "Goodbye, Ellen. You're a jewel," said Mrs. Malloy, hugging the boy's mother. "Goodbye, Jean. Have a safe trip." There was no hugging the boys, of course, except Peter. Each girl hugged him hard. "I don't want you to go," he said. "Well, you still have some of those cookies we baked. I put extra chocolate chips in them just for you." "Goodbye, guys. Have a crummy year," Eddie said, laughing. "Goodbye," said Jake, grinning. "Hope you flunked 7th grade." The mothers looked helplessly. "Where did we fail?" they laughed. "Goodbye, Wally," said Caroline. "Look for my name on Broadway." "Sure, when the Mississippi River runs dry," said Wally. The girls climbed into the car, and Mrs. Malloy got into the driver's seat. "All we need now is for the car not to start and to have to spend another week with the Hatfords while it's fixed," said Beth. But the car did start, and soon it was backing down the drive. The girls waved. The boys waved. Caroline pressed her nose against the window and watched as the boys disappeared, the house disappeared, and the swinging bridge disappeared. In just a few minutes, she and her mother and sisters were out of town. "Okay, boys," Mrs. Hatford said, "go back upstairs and air out your sleeping bags. Pick up all your clothes and put them either back in your drawers or in the hamper." The boys usually hated the job of straightening up, but Wally was so eager to get his room all to himself again, and the twins were so eager to get their own bedroom back, they went straight upstairs. Jake and Josh took their sleeping bags out on the back porch and unzipped them, then flopped them over the railing. "Hey!" yelped Jake. "There are ladybugs in mine!" "Mine too!" cried Josh, as bugs began flying in all directions. 2 notes fluttered to the ground, one from each bag. Wally, who had heard the twins yell, came running to the steps. "A little something to remember us by," he read aloud. Josh read the other, "The Whomper, the Weirdo, and the Crazy." "Caroline, will you please stop wailing?" said her mother. "I can't listen to that all the way to Ohio." "Yeah, Caroline, get a grip," said Eddie. "This was the most exciting year of my life, and it will never come again," Caroline said, weeping. "We didn't even get their email addresses. We may never hear from them again." "That would be bad?" asked Eddie. "We can always call, you know." Caroline unzipped her backpack and pulled out a tissue to blow her nose, and then screamed. "Now what?" said her mother. "Ladybugs!" cried Caroline. "My backpack's full of them, and there's a note." Beth snatched it from her hand and read it to the others. "Thought you liked something from Buckman to take along with you. Have a good trip. Jake and Josh, Wally and Peter." Now, you tell me, who won the war?